I hid in my son's SUV with a warm box of empanadas. I expected an eye roll and a hug. What I heard instead was a plan. The passenger door opened. Expensive perfume. Kelsey. Are you absolutely sure no one will ask questions when it happens? Silence. Then my son. It'll look like life. Stairs. Night. And Kelsey again, neat as a grocery list. Quick cremation. That's the moment my heart learned a new word for heat. They talked money like worshipers losing their faith, debts, late commissions, a house they couldn't afford, and then my house floated into the conversation like a rescue boat they planned to repaint and call their own. She even knew my life insurance number. Numbers should not know your name that way. I didn't burst out. I didn't plead. I walked across a Tucson evening and told a woman who knows the truth when it knocks. Mrs. Whitaker, former ER nurse, steady hands, spare keys. In the morning, Detective Jordan Pike laid it out, slow and clean. No confrontations, no heroics. We do this by the book. People who plan crimes narrate. So we let them talk. 2 small cameras, a quiet house, a brighter porch light they insisted I needed, a loose rug they hoped I'd miss, paperwork they were helping me with. Here's my promise to you, the viewer. When they finally sit down in my living room to divide a life I'm still living, I will walk through my own front door with the law, with a camera, with my name, and I will say one word that stops them. No. This is how a box of empanadas became evidence, how a mother became a witness, and how the truth got hungry enough to eat the whole plan. Tucson's June heat had already turned the hospital lot into a skillet, the asphalt shimmering and sticky beneath the sky that wouldn't blink. I carried the bakery box like a small secret, spotted Mateo's old white SUV tucked under a Palo Verde, and tugged at the back door. It opened. I laughed to myself. You never lock this thing, I whispered, easing on to the back floorboard behind the driver's seat with the box balanced on my knees. The car smelled faintly of disinfectant and dust, the scent of long desert afternoons. I crouched there like a teenager about to pull a silly prank, already picturing his face when I popped up and said, "Guess who came with lunch?" 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps. The front door opened. My tail slid into the driver's seat, keys jangling against a lanyard I bought him 5 Christmases ago. A second door opened. A thread of expensive perfume climbed into the car. Kelsey. I smiled in the half-dark and reminded myself not to yelp when I surprised them. "Are you absolutely sure no one will ask questions when it happens?" Kelsey said. Her voice did not sound like the voice she used for open houses and social media stories. It was colder, flatter, a voice that wore sunglasses indoors. I felt something pressed down on my chest. "Kels," Mateo said, exhaling. "We've been through this. It'll look like life, stairs, night. No one's going to—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The word behind it grew by itself and started filling the car. Accident. Like it was a domestic appliance you could order online. Quick cremation. It's what my broker's family did when her aunt. It moves everything along. The heat in the SUV wasn't from the sun. It was from the terrible math they began to recite in soft, practical voices. They talked money like 2 people who had turned cash into a religion and were running short on faith. They were upside down on everything. Her commissions were laid. His suspension was, he kept saying, temporary. The credit cards were loud. The house they wanted wouldn't stop blinking in Kelsey's feed. A sunlit, staged kitchen with clean gold fixtures and a mortgage that would never be kind. My house floated into the conversation like a rescue boat they planned to repaint and call their own. $250 if we list fast, more if we stage. Young buyers love cozy. She said the word cozy like a surgeon says biopsy. My life insurance, she added, somehow knowing the number without ever asking me. It landed in the air like a digital deposit. Between that, savings, and the house, we're fine. They said fine like people do when nothing is. I didn't jump out. I didn't make a sound. I listened as my son explained mechanically and maybe to himself that he would handle the paperwork because that's the respectful thing to do, and Kelsey said exactly the way people do on panel shows when they agree with opinions that don't belong in a family car. When they finally stepped out and the SUV went quiet, I could hear my heart more than the engine. I kept still until their footsteps faded. Then I crawled out, holding the empanadas like evidence I didn't want to ruin. I crossed that parking lot through heat that felt personal, slid into my Corolla, locked the doors, and let the first tears fall. Not the loud ones, the precise ones, the kind that leave clean lines on dusty cheeks. If all you know of grief is funerals, you won't understand the kind that arrives inside parked cars on ordinary afternoons. It doesn't knock. It just sits down and asks what you're going to do next. I drove the 5 miles home with my hands careful on the wheel, pulled into my driveway, and carried the empanadas into a kitchen that always smelled a little like cumin and clean countertops. I put the box down. I washed the pan I used to fry them earlier until the metal showed me the ceiling fan turning. I lined my thoughts up on the counter and tried to stack them into something that didn't fall over. Accident. Quick, cremation, insurance, house. The words did not behave. They rolled everywhere. I put both palms on the laminate until it gave slightly beneath my hands, and then I took them off, afraid I might leave shapes behind. At dusk, I walked across the cul-de-sac to the square little house with the blue porch swing. Mrs. Whitaker opened the door as if she'd been waiting. She always seemed to know when someone was coming, like she could hear worry from halfway down the block. Former ER nurse, widow, 70 and sharp. She kept a towel over her shoulder and a spare key to everyone's house in a labeled shoebox. I said, I need to tell you something that doesn't sound real. And she said, then we'll make it real. Come in. We sat at her kitchen table with glasses of iced tea that sweated onto napkins, and I told her. I used the same voice I used for grocery lists and holidays so I wouldn't fall apart. I spoke about the car and their voices and the way the word accident can be made into a tool. I spoke about money, about houses they couldn't afford, about numbers Kelsey shouldn't know. I said they sounded like they were planning something inevitable and polite, and Mrs. Whitaker's mouth thinned. She reached across the table and wrapped my hands up in hers so completely I felt my pulse slow. Nora, she said, this is not just ugly family talk. This is criminal. She had a nurse's way of saying things that made them true before you could argue. You are not going to confront them. You are not going to be alone tonight. In the morning, we call the right people. The right people, I asked? Detective Jordan Pike, she said. Elder abuse and financial exploitation. He gave a presentation at the community center last spring. He's the one you call when sons begin to do math with their mothers. I wanted revenge and gentleness at the same time, which is the same thing as wanting sleep and coffee at once. I don't want to wreck his life, I said. I want him to stop. That's what consequences are for, she replied. They make people stop. In the morning, Detective Pike sat across from us in a room at the station that made both of us look older. He had careful eyes and a notebook that filled in clean lines. I told my story again, shorter this time, as if I were trying for a passing grade on a test I'd never wanted to take. He asked questions that were small and tidy, and not at all small in what they meant. How long had the debts been a problem? Had Kelsey ever asked me directly about my accounts? Did I have a will? Had anyone been controlling access to my home? I answered. He wrote. He didn't promise justice the way television characters do. He promised a process with edges and supervision. If you want to proceed, he said, we do it by the book. That means we collect what we can collect legally. No solo operations, no confrontations. We open a case for conspiracy and financial exploitation, potentially homicide if we see enough intent. We place recorded devices in your home with your consent. We monitor public interactions when possible. We document everything. If we get there, we conduct a controlled sting. You will not stage anything yourself. He looked at me, then at Mrs. Whitaker. You will not stage anything yourself. Mrs. Whitaker nodded like a woman who had watched lines get crossed and never forgot where they were. I nodded too. I kept nodding even when I wanted to say just one theatrical moment, just one, where I walk in and make their faces show me who they are. He slid a form across the table, then a brochure that said, Protecting Older Arizonans, Financial Exploitation and Coercion. I signed where he told me to sign. He laid out what would happen next with the slow precision of someone assembling something delicate. 2 cameras in my living areas with my written consent. Audio where it's permitted. Notices filed the way notices are supposed to be filed. He talked about safe places and officers parked closer than anyone would guess. From this moment on, he said, you do not go home alone. If they visit, you do not improvise. You do not bargain. You let them talk. People who plan crimes narrate. People who plan crimes narrate, Mrs. Whitaker repeated, as if she'd been given a professional tip that would finally explain the worst stories in her hospital years. That night, Officer Harris walked me into my own house like it was evidence. He was big in the gentle way some men are, and when I reached for my suitcase and froze at my bedroom door, he unhooked a photograph from the wall, me and Manny in 1989 on a picnic blanket, and handed it to me, without comment. I slept at Mrs. Whitaker's, or I lay down and stared at her ceiling, which was different from mine in every way, and somehow exactly like it when you're trying not to cry. By noon the next day, 2 technicians placed small silver eyes in the quarters of my living room and den, asked permission again, thanked me again, and left. Detective Pike repeated himself because repetition saves lives. You won't go back alone. We'll sit, we'll watch. When they call, you let the phone ring once for fear and you answer on hope. He didn't really say that last part, but it felt like he did. They called the next afternoon. Kelsey first. We've been so worried, she said, a smooth worry with a gloss on it. We were thinking we could bring dinner, help you with that stair landing you said sticks. Mateo's good with tools. I don't remember saying that, I said. You mentioned it, she insisted brightly. It's easy to miss a step. We'll bring a brighter bulb for that porch light, too. Don't worry, we've got you. From across the table, Mrs. Whitaker lifted a pencil and wrote, brighter bulb and sticks. I heard the pencil tip whisper against paper. Not tonight, I said. I'm tired. Tomorrow, then, Kelsey replied, happy to pencil me into a calendar I didn't know I was on. Wear something comfortable. We'll go through closets, too. Declutter. You said you wanted to. I had never said I wanted to, but I said all right, because sometimes the only way to see how big something is to let it come closer. My brother arrived before they did the next day, his knock too cheerful for noon. Rick likes to be the star of every story where someone else pays the bill. He hugged me. Denise set down a carrier of coffees as if she'd invented generosity, and they both looked around the living room with quick eyes that measured and measured. You look tired, Rick observed. Long week, I said. Funny thing, he said. I was just talking to a guy about houses on this block. The market is hot. If you ever wanted to move, I finished. Yeah, He said pleased that I'd kept up. You know, fewer stairs, quieter, less upkeep. Mateo agrees. Mateo agrees, I repeated. It's a small sentence. It held a lot. Denise walked straight to my bookshelf. You always kept too many things, she said. Sentimental gets dusty. She pulled a frame forward as if I had cluttered her house by making a life. Mateo and Kelsey arrived together. Kelsey kissed the air beside my cheek. Mateo hugged me the way a person hugs a piece of furniture he's considering selling. We toured my home, the stairs, the landing, the rug by the dining table, the lamp in the den. Kelsey wrote down the words risky and hazard with the delight of a woman who had learned a new vocabulary she could spend. In the kitchen, Rick opened drawers like bank accounts. Denise touched my old bracelets with one finger, then both, then tucked her hair behind her ear in a way that made it look like she was doing me a favor. I poured coffee, I handed out mugs, I asked no questions. Questions would have made it my conversation again. They did not want that. Kelsey said, in the same tone she uses to sell condos, "We could make your space so much safer, you know, for you." "For me," I repeated lightly, and she smiled as if I had complimented her earrings. Mrs. Whitaker texted Detective Pike from her dining room. I didn't see it, but I could feel it. That is how close you can get to people when the world turns wrong. You can feel their texts. 2 nights later, Mateo invited me to dinner. "That Italian place you liked," he said, and I said, "I didn't like it." And he laughed and said, "You'll like it this time. Kelsey told me to wear that green dress because you looked pretty in photos. I wore navy because I didn't feel like being anyone's brand." They asked the careful questions over bread and noise. "How's your balance? Do you ever get dizzy? You know, with stairs. Are you keeping up with your health checkups? Have you thought about updating?" Kelsey let the sentence drift until I tied it up for her. "My will?" I asked. "Just for peace of mind," Kelsey said, "for everyone." Mateo added, "I could help you review it because men often assume the good son is the same as a free attorney and the same as the executor of reality." I said, "I'll think about it," which is one of the most honest things I've ever said in a room full of plates. They insisted on walking me up the porch when they drove me home. Kelsey touched the bulb and frowned. "So dim," she said. "Someone could miss a step." Mateo pressed his shoe against the edge of the rug. "Loose," he observed, and both of them nodded as if they were contractors diagnosing a job they were about to bid on. When they left, I sat on the stairs and breathed through my mouth so I wouldn't have to smell my house the wrong way. Then I went across to Mrs. Whitaker's, where the air always smelled like lemon and clean keeper. We called Detective Pike. He said, "It's escalating. We go to a controlled absence." "I don't want to fake anything," I said. "You won't," he replied. "You will step aside. We will handle the public information. Your neighbor will manage your house. You will be safe. We will be working." He explained the process with care. In official language, it is dull and responsible. In human language, it means what you think it means. I would vanish without drama while my family behaved the way people behave when they believe the person who stops them has stepped out of the room. No how-to, no tricks, no TV stunts, just absence and observation and the slow click of consequences drawing near. On day 3 of my new invisibility, Mrs. Whitaker handed me a phone and said, "A reporter is on the line." Savannah Lee introduced herself in a voice that had practiced being calm while the facts heated up. "Detective Pike looped me in," she said. "I cover elder exploitation and guardianship fraud, and every story where someone tries to cash out a life they didn't make. If there is a lawful sting and you consent, I want a camera there when the truth walks in." "You'll blur faces until arrests are made," Detective Pike said from a chair on the corner, making sure the room understood the order of things. "Of course," she said. "We do this clean." The phrase had come to the table twice in 1 week. Only one person made it sound like an oath. While I was away, my house turned into a mirror. There are mirrors that flatter and mirrors that tell the truth,
and mirrors that show you the thing you refused to know when you were trying to be polite. The camera feed showed me Kelsey discovering the role she was born to play, tour guide of my future home. She moved through my rooms with her phone in her hand and her voice on a cheerful setting I had never heard in my kitchen. "Bungalow fever is back," she told Rick. "We could list next Friday." She called my furniture charming and my curtains vintage, which is a polite word for old when you're in a hurry to replace something. She held my crocheted pillow up to the light and smiled as if it were a childhood friend she'd outgrown. Rick asked about insurance and spoke the way men speak when they think they're doing the boring part nobly. "We just need to make the calls and fill forms," he said. It's what she would have wanted. His voice tilted toward a lecture I did not need to hear from a brother who had never once asked me if I needed help airing out a rug after monsoon or how the mortgage got paid the year Manny died. Denise trailed Kelsey, murmuring advice no one had asked for. "People don't like knickknacks," she said, as if she were reporting on a new medical guideline. "Clean surfaces sell the dream." She touched my wedding photo with 2 fingers, placed it down with the softness of a person arranging puzzle pieces, and then said, "Wild that she never learned to aspire." I watched these people, my people, talk in my rooms as if I were a piece of news they were managing. The cameras caught Mateo pacing with a phone at his ear, his voice careful and professional, the voice he learned to use when he wanted things to sound safe. "Natural causes," he said. "No autopsy indicated. Elder, yes. Thank you." He hung up and told Kelsey, "A week." She repeated it like a child tasting a new word. She laughed softly. It was not a kind sound. They spoke about a memorial, like event planners choosing a color scheme. "Simple and private," Kelsey suggested. It's what she would have wanted. They had said those words before about other things, and they meant the same thing this time. Cheap and quick. Rick raised his voice to talk about equity, because equity is what people say when they want to sound like they're not stealing. Denise ran her palm along my dining table as if she were smoothing me down to a uniform grain in preparation for sale. When they finally left, the house looked back at me through the lens. For the first time since Manny died, I did not feel like a woman who had failed to make other people comfortable. I felt like a witness.
Detective Pike said, "This is enough to proceed." I said, "It's enough to charge. It's not enough to teach." He closed his notebook softly, as if he were folding the wing of a bird. "Then teach," he said, "with the law beside you." Savannah said, "There will be a meeting. There's always a meeting. They call it a reading or a distribution. People like this love the part where they bring pens. That's where you walk in." Mrs. Whitaker squeezed my hand so briefly a camera would have missed it. "We'll iron your red dress," she said, "and you will lift your chin." The text arrived on a Thursday from Mateo to Mrs. Whitaker's phone because she was now the only person he believed would carry messages to me. It read, "Saturday, 3 p.m., Mom's Place. Bring ID for the lawyer. We need to verify heirs." There was no lawyer. There were 2 officers with quiet shoes, a warrant set Detective Pike called gift wrapped, and a reporter who had learned how to hold a microphone like sympathy. On Saturday, the sky was the color you only ever get in southern Arizona, a clear, impossible blue behind mountains that looked like they were placed there on purpose. At 2:55, Rick and Denise used the key they'd borrowed that morning. At 2:57, Mateo and Kelsey arrived carrying folders and confidence. At 3:08, they were sitting in a semicircle on my living room furniture, the chairs whose arms I had sanded last spring, the sofa Manny and I bought after his first promotion, arranging my life into numbers. At 3:12, I walked up my own front path with Savannah and a cameraman behind me, 2 officers at the edge of the yard, and Mrs. Whitaker on the sidewalk across the street pretending to fuss with her mailbox. I put my key into my lock and turned it. The sound was ordinary. The silence after it, walked into the living room, was not. Denise was the first to scream. Names blur when people show you themselves. "Oh my God," she said, the words too high. "Then it's a ghost." Kelsey pressed her hand to her mouth and stumbled to her feet. Rick went deathly still, the way men do when they've almost been caught before and thought they'd learned how to run. Mateo dropped a folder, papers spread across the rug like birds no one had trained. "Good afternoon," I said. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Savannah stepped in behind me and raised the microphone. "Savannah Lee," she said, her voice steady enough to hold a building up. "Local news. We're here at the request of Miss Valdez." She did not say which channel. She did not need to. The camera had a red eye. Everyone understood the language of it. "What is this, Mom? What is this?" "This," I said, walking farther into the room, "is me attending a meeting about my things." Kelsey found her lines first. "We were just trying to help," she insisted, still half turned as if she might leave through the wall. "We were worried about you. You've been so absent." On advice of law enforcement, Detective Pike took one step into the frame. He didn't say his name. He didn't have to. He held up a paper. "Afternoon," he said. "Please stay where you are." Kelsey pointed at the camera. "You can't do this," she said, which is what people say when they have done something and hope the world will politely also not do things. "What did you plan to do?" I asked, and I watched my son's face because there was a time when his face had been the only thing I wanted to look at. He looked at me as if he'd forgotten how to organize what he was feeling into acceptable words. "You were gone," he managed. "We had to take care of arrangements, like a brighter porch light and a looser rug." He flushed, and for a moment I saw the boy who confessed to coloring on the hallway wall and tried to solve it by hugging me so hard I couldn't be mad. "The paperwork," Kelsey said, grabbing at phrases. "We were going to call a lawyer." She held up a folder like a passport that could get her into a country where this never happened. Savannah asked the question in a voice lined with steel. "What kind of paperwork?" "The kind families do. It's personal." She looked at the camera and then at Detective Pike. "Turn that off." "It stays on," Savannah replied. "Faces are blurred until arrest. Audio is used with consent. This is Miss Valdez's home. You were invited by her under oversight." She looked to Pike, who nodded once, and then to me. "Would you like to tell them why you invited us?" I turned to Mateo. "I sat in your SUV with a box of empanadas. I had decided to be silly and show up in your afternoon with food. I heard your voices. I heard the word accident used like a tool. I heard the words quick cremation used like a shortcut. I heard numbers, my numbers, stacked like a plan. I thought I was losing my mind. Then I listened to you talk in my house when you thought I wasn't in the world anymore. I listened to you make lists and schedule a meeting to divide me while you called it love." "That's a lie," Rick snapped. "She's lying. She's trying to..." "Trying to what?" Savannah asked. "Get her own house back?" Denise cried. Not a grief cry, a loud, messy, worst day at the airport cry. "We were scared. We're behind. Everyone is behind. She knows we've had a hard year." "I know you've had a hard 20, I said. "I also know I paid my mortgage with cafeteria paychecks and learned how to live without asking anyone to carry the heavy end. I know I asked you last spring if you wanted help with groceries, and you told me you wanted respect. I know what you wanted this spring." Kelsey recovered her footing on the only ground she had ever trusted. "This is getting ugly," she said. "We have always been trying to help Mateo's mother. You can make anything sound bad when you cut it together." Savannah didn't look away from her. "That's why we're not cutting anything." Mateo stepped forward, then stopped when one of the officers lifted a hand an inch. "Mom," he said, and his voice finally broke like a fever. "I'm sorry. This is out of control. I didn't mean. We were under pressure. We were supposed to close on a place by August, the lender. We were going to figure it out, and then this, the suspension. I didn't want to worry you." "You didn't want to ask me," I said, "because you thought the answer might be no." He opened his mouth and closed it. Kelsey stared at him with the look I had never wanted to see on anyone's face toward my child. Calculation. "Enough," Detective Pike said. He stepped forward and addressed all four of them with the calm you develop when you've watched people cross themselves with their own choices too many times. He read his notes, statutes that had numbers and names, quietly. Conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, attempted fraudulent schemes, preparation to conceal evidence of intent. He listed the supports beneath each. Audio recorded with consent and under warrant within Miss Valdez's home, photographic evidence of property survey and valuation timing, communications related to insurance inquiries in advance of any lawful claim. He did not read anything dramatic. He did not need to. The room had already had its drama. The officers moved in measured lines. There were no shouted orders. Mateo looked at me as they took his wrists, and in that look was everything you might expect: disbelief, fury, fear, shame, and a smaller thing I had not expected to find there: relief. Kelsey hissed, "Don't say anything," between her teeth. Rick said, "This is a mistake." And then he said, "I didn't even want to come." And all of them looked like versions of people I had met at family barbecues and holidays when the good dishes come out and no one mentions the check. Savannah lowered the microphone. "Mrs. Valdez," she said quietly, "how are you doing?" I looked down at my hands. They were steady. I looked at the chair where I had spent 2 years reading to Manny when the migraines were bad, and at the spot by the bookshelf where Mateo used to land after soccer practice, sweaty and smiling. I said, "I am in my home." When they were gone, the house had the decency to make a sound like a long-held breath leaving. I sat in the armchair they'd chosen for the meeting and leaned back into it until the cushion remembered me. Savannah crouched a little, lowering herself to my height without making it look like a performance. "This will air in a way that protects you and the process," she said. "You'll be asked if you want to speak again after the arraignment. If you don't, we'll use your words today. If you do, we'll hold the rest." "I'll speak once more," I said. "Then I want to be ordinary again." "Ordinary is underrated," she said, and for the first time since Monday, I laughed. In the weeks that followed, ordinary returned the way rain does in August, sudden and loud. There were arraignments and hearings. The charges were complicated and then very simple. The public defender assigned to my son spoke about context and stress. Kelsey hired someone whose shoes looked expensive in a way that made his arguments sound like they were taking place in a nicer room. Rick tried a strategy that could be summarized as, "This is all a misunderstanding that looks very, very much like the thing you say it is." Denise cried through most of a morning and then stopped abruptly when the judge asked a question that required an answer with a beginning, middle, and end. The prosecutor did not make speeches. He built a table with facts and invited the court to sit down at it. Recordings obtained with consent in my home and reviewed under supervision. Footage of conversations that took place in my living room where I had signed my name to allow documentation. Phone logs indicating insurance inquiries before any lawful claim could be made. A notebook with numbers that did not belong to anyone who had earned them. The phrase, "quick cremation," written on a page in Kelsey's handwriting, not underlined, not circled, just hanging there like a light that had been left on. When it was my turn to speak at the victim impact hearing, I did not try for eloquence. I kept it like a kitchen. I told the court about a boy who ate his cereal on the floor in front of Saturday morning cartoons because the couch felt too grown up, who wore a Halloween firefighter helmet for 3 Octobers in a row, who learned to make eggs at 12 and left his socks everywhere until the summer he had his first girlfriend. I spoke about the years where the hardest thing was not the rent, but the loneliness, and about the day I realized some people prefer the loneliness because it doesn't talk back. I said I don't choose loneliness anymore. I choose people who show up with groceries without being asked. I said I am not a ledger. And the courtroom was so quiet, it reminded me of my house at noon on a weekday, when the light is too honest to ignore. The judge said words I can almost remember verbatim, but not fully because I wasn't saving them for later. He said family is not entitlement. He said this court has seen many ways to turn love into leverage, but none of them stand up very long. He said that what had happened inside my house had been a chilling rehearsal, and that the law did not require a rehearsal to reach completion to recognize danger. He spoke about deterrence and protection and something I carry, not because I like the sound, but because I like the shape, the overwhelming interest of this community in the safety of its elders. Sentences came. Mateo's was longer than I had in my head and shorter than the version I wrote the night I was most furious. The judge noted his professional position and how that position had given him opportunities to know better. Kelsey's was substantial, with a crisp explanation about planning and leadership and notes that included my porch light in a way that made me almost dizzy with gratitude for boring, sober law. Rick's and Denise's were smaller and specific. Restitution wasn't just discussed, it was outlined. People asked if I felt victorious. I felt tired. Then I felt calm in a way that used to make me suspicious in other people. Calm that didn't mean numb. Calm like a set table at 4 p.m. I sold my house, not out of rage, out of relief. It had become a museum of a story I didn't want to give tours of. A young teacher and his wife bought it. They love the stairs and the rug and the odd way the porch gets shade in the hottest hour. I left a note in a kitchen drawer that said, "If the living room ceiling fan hums, push the cord once. It's shy." I took Manny's driftwood cross. I took the photograph Officer Harris grabbed from the wall the night this all began and put it in a box labeled, "Start Here." I bought a small, light-filled place nearer to Mrs. Whitaker, a townhome with a view of the Catalinas that make me drink my coffee slower. I started leaving my living room blinds open in the afternoon so the sun could come in and lay itself down on the carpet like a cat. I slept, the way you forget you know how to do. I kept my job at Pima for a while because the rhythm of lunch lines and receipts and freshmen who say thank you is a medicine not enough people take. I started volunteering at the campus food pantry because I had always believed that what keeps us alive doesn't ask for applause. With the money I didn't need anymore for a mortgage and the kindness strangers sent me when the story aired, I funded a small scholarship through the foundation. Nothing grand, just 5 single parents a year who could spend less time worrying about tuition and more time worrying about the ordinary things that worry is supposed to be for, like what to make for dinner on a Thursday. I called it Desert Bloom. I wanted a name that wouldn't sound foolish on a check and would still make people remember that beauty arrives after heat if you keep a little water in a bowl outside. Mrs. Whitaker and I began a Sunday ritual that involved her porch swing and lemon bars and the sort of gossip that doesn't rot anybody out from the inside. We formed a little circle of people who had learned the hard way who their real families were. A man whose niece had emptied his garage while he was in rehab, then denied it with a straight face.
A woman whose daughter learned to use words like entitled on counseling blogs and never once used the word sorry. A neighbor I had never met whose son had begun to insist that helping him meant accepting that she owed him everything. We did not dwell. We told stories until they turned back into stories. 2 years passed. Tucson has seasons if you live here long enough and stop arguing with the desert about it. The summer after the sentencing, I was planning bluebills with a friend from the campus when a letter arrived from the prison. It was Mateo's handwriting on the envelope, the weird teenage swoop of the V in Valdez he never grew out of. I carried it inside and set it on the table and stared at it as if it were a small animal that might bite. Then I opened it, because there are some pains that grow teeth when you try to keep them on a shelf. He apologized. Every line sounded less like a script than I expected, and more like a person sitting with himself in a place where the mirror has no filter. He wrote about a group inside that makes men say their crimes out loud without adjectives. He wrote about how it felt startling and then clean to say the words, "I tried to make my mother's death possible," and then not fall over. He wrote about wanting to know if I was safe without asking for anything that would make me unsafe. He wrote about Manny and how he remembered his father's laugh and how he couldn't understand why remembering it made his stomach hurt. He wrote that he didn't expect forgiveness because he had finally figured out forgiveness is not a math problem and not a coupon you can redeem. He ended with, "If the only thing you ever send me is a line that says you read this, it will be more than I deserve and more than I had yesterday." I read the letter 3 times in the kitchen and once in the living room and once on the porch while the sky was doing that Tucson thing where it becomes pink right before it decides whether or not to rain. Then I wrote back. I wrote, "I am safe." I wrote, "I will not visit this year." I wrote, "I accept your apology because it tells me you have turned toward the truth. Forgiveness will take longer and it is a work you will have to do, not a gift I can hand you. There is a boy in you I remember and a man you became I do not understand. If you ever meet the boy again, tell him his mother still likes the way he laughed at the wrong places in movies." He wrote once more, a postcard this time, a picture of a saguaro in bloom that someone had taught him was beautiful. He didn't say much. He didn't ask for more. I put the card in the same drawer as Manny's cross and the key to the old house that no longer exists in my pocket. Sometimes the story airs again in a roundup of outrageous crimes or inspiring stings, and my phone starts blinking with messages from strangers who call me brave. I am not brave in the way you think. I did not kick down a door or wrestle anyone. I did something smaller and stranger. I told the truth out loud with other people listening, and I let consequences be heavy enough to matter. On a Tuesday in March, Savannah asked if I would appear for a follow-up segment about elder exploitation cases trending downward in our county. I said yes, because saying yes to the right person at the right moment is prayer with better posture. She stood in my new living room with a camera and asked how I was. "Better," I said, and she waited, because she knows better is a sentence with more behind it. I work, I sleep, I read, I eat food I didn't cook and cook food that takes all day. I thought I would feel hollow for the rest of my life, but I planted things that took up the space. "Would you change anything?" she asked. "I didn't plan any of this," I said. "I wanted to feed my son hot food. I wanted to be allowed to age into a woman who could keep living quietly. I did not get what I wanted. I got a different life." She closed the notebook she never actually needs on camera. She said, "Different can be a good word." "This time it is," I said. We sat on the sofa afterward and looked out at the mountains. The light had begun to turn the edges of everything soft. I said, "You know what I think about sometimes?" "What?" "How many people are sitting on their stairs or in their cars right now, feeling like they stepped out of their lives and can't find the door back?" "What would you say to them?" she asked. "I'd say that trust isn't a light switch. It's a garden.
If you have the wrong plants, you start over or you live allergic. Start over is harder. It's worth it. When she left, I carried a bowl of water out to the patio for the doves that come by at 4:30 like they own the place. Mrs. Whitaker walked up the path with a bag from the bakery and said, "I brought something with cherries because I know you hate cherries and I will therefore eat them all." "That's friendship," I said. "That's logistics," she said, and the porch swing squeaked as we both sat down. I could end this story in the courtroom with the judge's gravel-strong voice, or in my living room with the quiet after everyone left. But the truth is, the story keeps ending in small places. In the grocery aisle, where I do not avoid the section where you buy light bulbs. On the second stair, which still creaks in my head, even though it's someone else's now. At the college, when a student grabs 2 apples because she have a long shift after class, and you don't need to ask questions to fill a bag. And haven't you lived long enough to know you can treat people like they're telling the truth? Sometimes, when the desert decides to smell like rain, I stand at the window and say my name out loud, not because I'm afraid I'll forget it, but because I like the way it sounds with the last name of a man who loved me the right way and the first name my mother said when she wanted me to come home. I say, "I am Nora Valdez," and I remember all the versions of me that got me here. The girl who thought the cafeteria hairnet was a crown. The woman who learned how to stretch soup. The widow who paid a house off exactly the way she said she would. The mother who believed the boy's laugh would always sound like a song. The witness who walked into her own living room and said, "No." If you're listening and you are as tired as I was the day after the hospital parking lot, here is the only advice I'll risk giving you. Tell someone who tells the truth for a living. A nurse, a cop, a reporter who knows how to hold a microphone like a hand. You do not have to outthink dangerous people alone. You do not have to reenact their worst ideas to survive them. You can step aside and let the right people do the job they trained to do, while you pick out a plant that will thrive in the heat and remember to water it. On the first anniversary of the day I put my key in my own door and walked in to find the truth staring back at me, I invited the little group from the campus and the neighborhood over for pozole. We ate in the backyard. The desert had decided to be kind. Someone brought a guitar. Someone else brought a stack of paper plates because she's practical in all the ways that matter. In the middle of a second bowl, a student I recognized from the pantry stood up and said, "I got my certificate." He looked at his hands like they might drop it, like success is a wet bar of soap. We clapped too loudly, and no one asked him to give a speech. He sat down and ate more. After everyone left, I washed bowls and put the chairs away and stood alone for a minute to listen to the quiet. I pictured my old house for a moment and sent a wish through the air that the teacher and his wife had figured out the fan and the way the kitchen door sticks in September. Then I went inside my new place and put Mani's cross back on the hook and turned off the light. If you're wondering, when I pass the hospital lot now, the asphalt looks like asphalt again. The Palo Verde looks like a tired tree. I don't think about the SUV. I think about the way the sky looks over the Catalinas at almost 7 in June, and how that can surprise you, even when you live here and see it every day. I think about how the most ordinary things can be the plot twist you needed. I wanted to leave empanadas and a laugh and go home to a quiet night. I got justice and a garden and a set of friends who treat my first name like something precious. People call what happened to me a story. It is, but it is also a life. Mine. I am living it. When the monsoon rolls in and the desert smells like a library waking up, I open the door and let the good air in. I pictured the people who stood in my living room and the people who stood by the door to make sure I got to stand there too. I pictured the officer who handed me a photograph without being asked, and the nurse who put her hand over mine, and the reporter who said clean and meant it. I say thank you in the quiet because
Gratitude tastes better when you don't serve it like a performance. If you're the praying kind, pray for the people who think money will solve the kind of loneliness no deposit can touch. If you're not, light a candle and set a bowl of water out for the doves and get some sleep. Tomorrow you'll need to show up for someone and pour coffee and cut a slice of whatever you baked and tell them they can finish the story they started writing when they thought they were finished themselves. I didn't mean to overhear a felony. I meant to feed my son. The thing I fed instead was the truth. It's greedy in a different way. It wants more light. It wants more witnesses. It wants to keep you alive. And once you serve it, it lets you sit down in your own home, put your feet up, and know what your name sounds like when you say it without fear.